why don't we just take this opportunity, Daniel, then Nate, and then Michelle, just a quick introduction, your name and your title, please.
Sure. Hello, everyone. This is Daniel Goldstein. I'm CEO and President of Folience. We're 100% employee-owned, headquartered in Cedar Rapids, and our companies include the Gazette newspapers, Lifeline Emergency Vehicles in Sumner, Iowa, and Cimarron Trailers in Chickasha, Oklahoma.
Thank you, Daniel.
Good morning, Nate Jensema, CFO at Van Meter. We are also 100% employee-owned company in Cedar Rapids, based out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. We now have 25 locations in 7 states and roughly 800 employee owners.
Great, thank you, Nate.
Michelle Jenkins, President and CEO of Razor Holdings, also 100% ESOP. We're in Cedar Rapids. And let's see, so we have 160 employee owners. We have CarePro Health Services, Keltek, which is in Baxter, Iowa, JTech, which is also in Cedar Rapids, and then Midwest Memorials, which is in the Des Moines area. Wonderful.
So let's see. Why don't I start off with a question about the advantages that being employee-owned provides your companies from a recruitment and retention perspective. Michelle, why don't you take that one first?
Sure. It's a little bit tough. I think people don't understand employee ownership, and depending on what guidance they may be getting, I won't say it's voodoo, but it's a little smoke and mirrors if you don't understand it, I think. And so, I mean, we try to do a really good job with when we're recruiting to talk about employee ownership, because really it's 2 pieces, right? It's kind of the culture around employee ownership, and then there's a retirement plan. And so we try to talk about those separately because they are different, because a lot of companies have great cultures, might not be an ESOP. So we try to talk about what's available from a retirement, financial wealth. They can build financial wealth, but then also try and talk about our culture and how, I guess, we try to have employees engage around both of those principles.
Okay, great. Daniel, would you agree with Michelle's assessment there?
Yeah, absolutely. The good and the difficult of ESOPs is that they're great retention tools, but they're quite difficult for recruiting. And the reason being that specifically for younger employees, they're very concerned about their take-home pay and benefits, and ESOPs pay absolutely competitive salaries and benefits. But most young people really aren't thinking about saving for their retirement, which we all know is important. And so once we get them as employees, then we can start with education, and then the retention really becomes effective, especially getting a few years in as the employee owners begin to get their first statements. And so I'm sure that both Nate and Michelle can talk about long-term tenured employees. We've had employees that have been with our companies for 30 or 40 years because it's a great retention tool. Just tough to get that young, new potential employee to understand the ESOP until they've become an employee owner.
Yeah, I would agree. And to follow up on what Michelle said too, about really the 2 different kind of tracks of ESOPs, the culture and then the financial side. I agree with Daniel. The financial side really starts to kick in for that retention. But it's not enough for an ESOP company just to lean on and rely on the financial side. Again, I agree with Michelle. It's not as if ESOPs have cornered the market on culture, but it really is important to build the culture and not just lean on the financial side, because the culture is really what's going to bring people here, and it's going to attract the new employee owners. And then, once they are here for the culture and they're loving what they do, then, it takes a little bit of time too, but then you start to really understand what financially the opportunities are going to be for you and your family.
Hey, Nate, I just thought of a great tagline from what you said: come for the culture, stay for the retirement benefits.
And it would seem that employee ownership, as just as an idea, would be an attractive thing, particularly to young people just starting out, as the idea of owning a part of the company, being not just a number, but also part of the greater organization. Would be an attractive thing for people, and not just hey, we've got a great retirement plan.
And that's the piece of the culture that Michelle and Nate are talking about. It's the collaborative spirit. It's the decision making, the greater tendency towards inclusion. As employee owners, if you really are acting as an owner, that means that you have greater influence, you have greater decision making, you see a better line of sight between your individual contribution and the end result, and the value that you're accruing or sharing as employee owners. So absolutely.
So how do you go about making that central to the company culture? Does it just sort of happen organically, or are there steps that are important? Are there steps that you kind of have to take to to build that into the company culture?
Go first, Nate.
Yeah, sure. I would say absolutely. I mean, more power to the company that can find a way to do it organically, but I think it has to be purposeful and start from the top. And I think for us, it's about a regular communication. We've talked about how it can be a little bit challenging to really wrap your minds around the financial side of it. So it needs to be ingrained into kind of what we're doing each and every day. And it's not enough, to just have a once a year, here's your stock price communication. For us, it's, if you're tying the financial performance back to what does that mean for you as an employee owner, it's performance management. What does it mean to be an employee owner each and every day? We've built an anatomy of an employee owner to start setting out expectations for people. So it's how do we go about doing our work each and every day, has to tie back to building that culture and ultimately then really starting with probably what's the purpose? Why are we here? So for us, it's all encompassing, and it's a regular communication.
Michelle, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're smaller than both Daniel and Nate's companies are, but I think it's really challenging across locations and across different companies, because we found every company and every location has its own culture. And we have found you can try to say, oh, it's going to be the same, and we're going to do all the same things. And I guess we've learned based on our acquisitions, it's just not everything works everywhere. So obviously we have core things that you absolutely roll out to every location. But I think we've had to just be a little agile in saying, yeah, this really works here, but it doesn't resonate at this location or this company. And so I think we're trying to do a better job of honing in on different, whether it's activities or education, or obviously, like I said, there's some standard things across all companies that are available, but we're just finding it, it's just different. And we're all we're in Iowa, where, Folience and Van Meter are spread out amongst different states. So I'm sure it's even more challenging for them than it is for us, but that's probably been not frustrating, but I think you have to be really deliberate in creating and designing and scheduling how you want to try and engage employees and educate them.
Yeah, and I wish it was organic, but it's really changing the mindset. Most people, when they get employed, they show up for a job. And when you work for an employee-owned company, we're hoping and educating and encouraging people to show up as employee owners. And that's very different. And everybody knows that I always show this when I talk about employee ownership, that is the basis to what we're doing at Folience. And it's about getting people to participate in their ownership. And you don't have to have one of these cards. I know that at Razor and Van Meter, it's the exact same thing. It's getting people to understand that there are rights and responsibilities to being an employee owner. It's not just entitlement. It's not just, it's certainly not a handout. And while you don't pay for your ownership in the company, you do work for it. And so, we don't like to say that it's for free, because you are working for it and you're working towards increasing the value of the company. When you show up as an owner instead of just as an employee, you look for better use of resources, better ways to interact with your customers, better ways to increase safety, to interact with your colleagues. It's a big difference between being an employee owner and being an employee. And it takes a lot of education. And as Nate said, it comes from the top. If you're not modeling the behavior and listening to the employee owners and encouraging that environment, then it just doesn't work.
And Daniel, you brought up customers and clients. And another thing that I'd wanted to talk about is perhaps how being an employee-owned company, being an ESOP, can be a benefit to your clients and customers as well.
Yeah, I think you're going to hear the same from my colleagues here, that it's a great advantage. And the reason why is because when customers or dealers, distributors talk with employees, they're talking with owners. It's not hidden behind some big corporate structure. And that means that they know that there's pride in workmanship, there's trust, there's longevity, there's better tenure of employees, there's better consistency of brand and quality. And so there are great benefits doing business with an employee-owned company. And I know that, we were joking about taglines before. Another one that we use is American-made, employee-owned, because that resonates with customers and dealers. I'm sure Nate and Michelle, you see the same with your businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about, the way that a delivery driver, for example, interacts with our customers on a regular basis, right? I mean, they take pride in what they're doing and in the customers that they're serving. And so I want to believe that every touch point that a customer feels from an employee-owned company should feel differently than a non-employee-owned company. And then there's the financial side of it, which allows us as businesses, as employee-owned companies, to reinvest in our businesses in a ways that other companies are not afforded to, and that reinvestment impacts, it obviously benefits our employees, employee owners, it benefits the customers and suppliers, and it also should benefit the communities where we are working and living. So there's a kind of a soft side to that benefit, and there's also a real tangible benefit to the customers.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree on both sides. Hopefully from a patient or customer side, it gives the employee a little extra confidence if something's not going right, or maybe how to handle a situation that they feel they can make a decision. They're not, they have the cultures there and the supports there, that if they need to provide something at no cost, or, whatever the situation is, or go above and beyond, that they feel at least they feel the ability to approach the situation with more of an open mind of, how do I make this right? And I would say from a vendor side, you guys, I know, hear it all the time, employee owners are like, that's our money. Like, that's my money. Like, I'm going to try and get no freight. I'm going to try and get, I think that's always, it's kind of fun. I think that's kind of fun and exciting to hear them, really gear in with the vendor and be like, no, we're not paying, I'm not paying that. It's fun to hear them really talk about the money, like, and it is their money, but, like, it's truly, they're spending their own money. So I think, and that doesn't happen everywhere. That doesn't happen all the time. But when you do run across it, for me, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, like we've got a win here. We've got someone drinking the Kool-Aid, and really it's fun if you can get that across your entire organization.
And does it take much to get the word out about, that your company is employee owned when you're dealing with customers and vendors? I mean, is that something that, people are surprised to learn, or is it something you have to promote a lot?
We try to focus on local and employee owned, because I think the local,
okay,
even though, like, you guys are all over, but even in Des Moines, yeah, we're in Cedar Rapids, but still a lot of local control is there in Des Moines. That company has, control. So we talked about employee ownership, but I think it's important for us, to patients and customers, so we have a location in Coralville and Cedar Rapids, and we learned if we told a patient something was coming from Cedar Rapids, they're like, oh no, I want it local. We're like, well, kind of is. It's just so, even between Iowa City and Cedar Rapids, we've learned like locals like, nope, we'll get it from our warehouse. We'll have it tomorrow, or, whatever the situation is. So I think it's great though, that customers and patients want to invest locally. They want their dollars to stay and help locally, whether it's those employees that live in that community or the company that's there. So I think that's, for us, we try to focus on that as much as the employee ownership. So I still think people don't really completely understand what that means when you talk about employee ownership, unless you get a customer or patient who does. And then I think it reaps a lot of benefits if it's somebody who really understands employee ownership.
One of the things that we have found a lot of value in is bringing our customers and suppliers to Cedar Rapids to tour our distribution center. And, we operate a hub and spoke model. And so, regardless of, where you are in Iowa, generally you're going to be, supported from the distribution center here in Cedar Rapids. And one of the things that I'd like to think that customers and suppliers see as they walk around the distribution center is employee owners who take pride in what they do and in their company. And that comes across as, is the floor swept clean? Are rows neatly organized? And ultimately, do people have smiles on their faces, right? I mean, are they enjoying what they're doing? Are they enjoying who they're working with? And, whether customers and suppliers knew that we were employee owned when they came, I'd like to think that when they left, they had a better idea of what employee ownership means to the employee. I like when
Employees using their resources, their management, their light bill rate.
Very efficient.
I agree with what both of you are saying, and it's interesting because I never thought about the way that you're saying that, Michelle. So for the trailer and ambulance business, it's really easy to explain that we're employee owned, and people like that for a product that's sold across the country through dealer distributors, and it does differentiate the product from the other products that are out there, and talk about the pride of workmanship and each employee being an owner. And even if they don't understand what an ESOP is, people understand what employee owned means. So on that, it's quite easy to have that as a brand differentiator from other ambulance and trailer manufacturers. For the newspaper, it's much more what you were saying, Michelle. It's about being local and being independent. And I think that's what really differentiates the Gazette from other newspapers or media companies, that it's local and it's independent. And I believe that also is a brand differentiator there. So it might depend on your market and the reach where you're going for. But oddly enough, I would say it's almost easier to get the branding externally than internally. Because people do understand at the core what employee owned means. They may not understand all the mechanics and everything. Whereas with employees, it's really an education and a continuous education process.
Great. Another topic that I wanted to talk about was maybe more from the management side of things. And does it change your perspective on how you think strategically about your business by being an ESOP, being employee owned? Does that have any impact on the way that you go about your roles as executives?
I'll jump in. I would say absolutely. One of the we talked about kind of the two sides of employee ownership. One of which is the financial, and particularly in my role, this is not about just serving the employee owners who are here today. This is about serving employee owners who are going to, who just started out and who are hopefully going to be here for that, that long-term 20 to 30 years. And so this is, we're not playing a business game, so to speak, for the short term. This is a long-term sustainability, and those things really hit home when you think about really the purpose for it all. Is for the fact that you want to maintain a company and a benefit for employee owners for the long term. And so it's not just the benefit of one person, it's for all of the employee owners that we continue to create value in the long run.
Yeah, the working towards the long-term sustainability is so much different than what happens in public companies that are looking towards quarterly results, even annual results, where ESOPs are longer term. And that's why all the data shows that employee-owned companies do have a competitive advantage over other forms of ownership, because we are taking that long-term. What Michelle said earlier, employees care about the management of resources, and that means that as executives, we have a greater responsibility to be more open with our employees about the management of the company and how we're using resources. And so we use something called distributed leadership, which simply means that we tend towards greater inclusion and greater transparency in making decisions, to push the decisions out to the people that are closest to where the process is or the decision is being made, rather than being top down. And one example of it is, as CEO, I'm appointed by the board, and technically I report to the board, but I don't consider it that way. I consider it that I'm reporting to the 500 employee owners of Folience. So I'm actually, my boss is on this call.
I don't know about that, but
yeah, I would definitely agree. I think with an ESOP, we're willing to give up a little bit today for long-term results, and that's what we try to talk to our employees about. We really try to have, you want them to have a good work-life balance. Good. I don't know, that's not a thing, but you want them to enjoy coming to work every day. You want them to enjoy their time outside of work. You want them to get a decent wage, and then you want to really have that long-term financial wealth benefit. And I think sometimes we have to give on one of those to get the other. And just throw in there, and the incentives that you do, the bonuses that you do, the other perks, I guess, that you do. So we kind of talk about really trying to keep all those equal. And in any year, maybe one, you have to give a little on one to get maybe a little more on the other. But I think because I'm sure like our boards are all very supportive and they understand, and that's why they're on our board, the long-term goal of ESOPs, and that sometimes, maybe you do have to give a bonus, even though maybe you didn't meet the metric this year, but it was, 2020, or it was, whatever the reason was. It just, I guess it makes sense. And we say all the time, like, what's the right thing to do? I don't know how many times a day I feel like we either hear that, or we say, what is the right thing to do? It may not always be the financial right thing to do, but it's the right thing to do. And I think you'd hear that from a lot of ESOP companies.
Michelle, I would think that would be, going back to the concept of retention, that would be, just a great example of how employee-owned companies can be, can have a lot of strength with employee retention if it's part of the culture to treat your people well in good times and bad, to have that value there. And it would also seem that it could be a strength to the organization in terms of the internal, having people who are there for a long time is an advantage for the company. That institutional knowledge, the experience there. Would you say it's also a strength? I mean, are ESOPs and employee-owned companies maybe more resilient if they're thinking more long-term, maybe more able to withstand challenges, that other publicly owned companies might not be? Just kind of thinking off the top of my head here.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think, based on my last comment, I feel, at least in our company, we've probably been a little more patient in writing out, if we have a division that maybe wasn't just knocking out the park. We probably help me, maybe at times we waited too long to make a decision because of the loyalty and the ESOP and that, but I don't regret any of those decisions, and going back and say, maybe we waited a year too long or 2 years too long. But I guess that's what I think is also good about our board of directors and our leadership team is, and we can afford, I guess, because we're not being judged the same as a company that's probably being publicly traded, to just make sure we're making those decisions, and not that anybody makes knee-jerk decisions on those types of things, because they are very serious. But I do feel that I guess that from my other experience prior to being an ESOP, the philosophy is just different as far as really considering what's best for the company.
And there is hard data out there, and I don't have it at hand, but the data shows that ESOPs are much less likely to lay off people during downturns or lay off fewer people, which again, what was being mentioned, doing the right thing and maybe not the short-term financially right thing, but that means that they're better positioned to recover more quickly in the upturn. And so that's an example of the resiliency that adds to the financial competitive advantage of employee-owned companies.
Daniel and Michelle, as executives of companies that are, that have multiple branches, I was hoping you could speak to this next topic about because another aspect of ESOPs is that they're a way for owners to ensure the long-term strength and survivability of their business. If they want to pass it on to their employees and not just sell it to a competitor or to liquidate the company, if they don't have someone that they're planning on passing the business off to. When you're looking at potential businesses to, that might be open to being transitioned to an ESOP to be acquired, are there things that you look for, or how do you approach a company about about that type of a transaction, or how do you sell them on the idea?
Do you want to go, Michelle, or you want me to?
Go ahead, you can start. You have more experience than we do.
Well, and we need to get Nate in on this because they've done probably even more acquisitions than us.
Oh, good. Well then.
So as far as the acquisitions go, yes, the first thing is that we aren't doing turnarounds, so we only acquire and look at acquiring a profitable company. Employee ownership by itself will not fix a problem, and that's not where we want to take our risk. And part of not doing turnarounds is that we do look at a culture that is not completely broken or toxic, and having some management continuity, because otherwise that would also be somewhat of a turnaround. As far as approaching the owner, what makes for a successful conversation to lead to an acquisition is an owner that they want fair market value for their company, but they're very concerned about their commitment to their employees, the community, and their brand. And they know that investing in the employees through employee ownership is going to be the best path forward to sustaining that. The data shows that any company that's sold to private equity on average between 3 to 5 years from that sale will be resold again. And so that destroys the culture, the brand, management, employees go running for the doors. Personally, two of my favorite days of my career were getting up in front of the Lifeline employees and the Cimarron employees when they were gathered together, not knowing what was being announced, and having their owners say, "We're retiring, we're selling the company, and now Daniel's here to tell you about how you're going to become the owners." That's really powerful, and that does not happen when private equity or a strategic buyer comes in.
Yeah, I'd like it. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I think Van Meter's probably done more acquisitions within their industry than we have. But yeah, I agree with Daniel. I think we have an advantage over a lot of other, depending on the owner, right? So depending on the owner's goals, if it's keeping the company together, keeping it operating, and maybe not getting the absolutely highest dollar that they can for their business, they love the idea of ESOP and employee ownership. That's been our experience, and so I think that's definitely given us an advantage. As we've talked to those companies, or as other companies have contacted us, I'm sure just like Daniel, they like the idea and Nate also of employee ownership, and just feeling that's a big decision for those owners. They're selling something they've a lot of times started and grew, or that's even been in their family for a long time. Doesn't seem like kids are as willing to step into the family business maybe as they used to be. They want to do different things. And so, it's a really big decision for them. And so, it's emotional, and and it's a tough. And so I think they feel really good about selling to a company that's going to kind of keep, for the most part, keep that company intact.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that, in terms of what we look for, I mean, ultimately, we want to make sure that it's the right, fit. And it begins with the people, right? The people of those organizations that are going to become employee owners. Because as we've talked quite a bit, it is a change to just from being an employee to an employee owner. So to the extent that you can get a sense of, what is the culture like, how is management run the organization over the last several years? You can start to get an idea of, is that going to assimilate well into an employee-owned culture? And then in terms of the seller, I would echo the comments already said. It's do you get the is this an owner who takes pride in their organization and wants to see that the employees and that business sustain in that community for years to come? I think that's makes it a lot easier to connect with them as a potential buyer.
All right. Well, with that, I think we'll pause there, and I just want to thank you folks so much, Daniel, Nate, Michelle, for taking time this morning to talk with me about this. I think hope it was a good conversation for you as well. I feel like I learned quite a bit. So thank you so much for participating in this executive roundtable for the Gazette.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Nate.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, folks.
You guys too. Take care.